Congress is running out of time to fund the government. A shutdown would begin at midnight on Tuesday if no deal is reached, and both parties are already playing the blame game. Listen to what Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said just this afternoon.
Mike Johnson has my number. John Thune has my number. He knows how to reach myself. He knows how to reach Leader Schumer. The White House knows how to reach us. Why are they running out of town? It's because Republicans want to shut down the government. They want to continue to inflict pain on the American people, and they want to continue to gut the health care of everyday Americans. Democrats are not going to go along to get along. Our position is clear. Cancel the cuts, lower the costs, save health care.
Now, on the other hand, the White House is warning that Democrats will pay a huge price. Earlier this week, the Office of Management and Budget instructed federal agencies to prepare for mass firings if a shutdown goes into effect. Here now, Democratic strategist Joel Payne. He was also a senior aide for Hillary for America and press secretary for former Senator Harry Reid. Tyler is still with us. Tyler, thank you for being with us again. I want to start with you. The president is expecting Democrats to cave or ultimately to become the scapegoats for a shutdown, but that's not what the polls are saying. What are you hearing from the White House?
Yeah, look, I think the White House, there are corners of the White House, Russ Vought among them, that have robust plans to carry out the president's agenda and feel that there are fewer roadblocks if the government is shut down. I think one of the challenges for Democrats in this moment is what is their message going to be if the government shuts down, and how are they going to compete with the Trump megaphone? Trump has been out there in the past few days already blaming Democrats for this, posting repeatedly on Truth Social and telling reporters that this is, part of Democrats' efforts to enact an agenda that he ran against in the 2024 election, talking about social issues like transgender issues and immigration. Even though that's not what the shutdown is about, Democrats are saying it's about healthcare. Trump is very clearly going out on the offensive about what this is. So I think Trump sees an opportunity here to brand the Democratic Party, or continuing to brand the Democratic Party, in what he believes is a negative way. I think for Democrats, there's a lot of agitation in the party about trying to stand up to Trump and show fight and resolve. I think the challenge is, what is their megaphone and what is their message, and how do they communicate that with Americans as the shutdown barrels toward happening, and then in the days when the government is actually shut down and people, everyday's lives are actually impacted.
Very much so part of the course for this administration, for Donald Trump to try and control the narrative. Curious to see how that's going to work. Joel, let's say no one blinks. And very much so, this feels to me like a heads I win, tails you lose scenario for both parties. To the extent that there is a shutdown, who is hurt worse? Which party is hurt worse by this? Because it seems like both have a lot to lose, to say nothing of what the American people have to lose with the shutdown as well.
Well, I'm not sure anyone is spoiling for a government shutdown per se. I think everyone is very clear-eyed about the real impacts that has on people. That said, Democrats have this as an opportunity to actually use some leverage to show the American people they have fight, that they have a vision, that they're willing to fight on the issue of health care. And more broadly, I actually think that, Donald Trump and Republicans, I get the sense that they actually wouldn't mind making a deal on health care. It's that they don't want to make a deal on health care against the backdrop of looking like they've backed down. So there's room here. There's a constituency here of Republicans who should want to back down off the brink here. The question is whether Donald Trump, Mike Johnson, John Thune will allow the Republican Party to do that. The last thing I would just say, this is a moment where Democrats have to make up for what happened in March. In March, Chuck Schumer folded, and there was lots of recriminations within the base of the Democratic Party. Folks have been encouraged that Schumer and that the leadership of the party has looked to fight this time around, but they actually have to go through with that. And I think this is a big moment for whether or not they can re-earn that trust from the grassroots of the party.
But Joel, when we have this conversation about fighting, and particularly when it comes from Democrats, Doesn't it become, in an instance like this, more about who's able to own the narrative one way or the other? If a deal is reached, if a deal isn't, sort of the first person to advance a narrative that seems plausible as to why this works, because there are Democrats who could say, look, this is us fighting because we refuse to cave without getting your health care saved. And Republicans can say, no, they just don't care about the American people, which is why they were content to have things shut down. So doesn't it just become a question of competing narratives at that point?
Yeah, look, the narrative piece is essential. And I guess what I would say is one thing that Democrats do has a disadvantage is there are not a ton of trusted messengers who are at the gears of the Democratic Party right now. There are folks who certainly are respected legislators, but in terms of public messengers, people who can drive a narrative, I would say that that is not a strength of the Democratic Party right now. So that's a place where they're going to have to level up. I think what is good news is that those folks have shown some steel and some resolve this time around. And I think what you're going to see is if they have the back of the American people, of the base of the Democratic Party, I think that those folks will have their back in turn. I actually think that this is the moment where they can start to make a case for why you should trust us with power in 2026 and beyond. This is essentially a first salvo for why you should vote Democrat in 2026 to serve as a check on Donald Trump.
So, Tyler, let's talk about OMB Director Russell Vought. It seems like he may have sort of placed his thumb on the scale because he jumped into the negotiations by saying that there's going to be mass layoffs of federal employees during a shutdown. What does that do to this conversation for either side?
I mean, yeah, Russ Vought has been trying to do this, not just him, but the Trump administration has been trying to do mass layoffs of federal employees since Donald Trump took office. They've been successful in some areas and the courts have blocked them in others. But I think it raises the stakes for Democrats in particular if Russ Vought goes forward with this. Democrats are downplaying the threat and saying this is just talk, but there are jobs at stake, right? And I think it'll turn into a blame game. And it also has consequences for the Republican Party, right? A lot of federal workers live in Virginia. There's a hotly contested gubernatorial race in Virginia. Coming up. And so there is stakes for both sides in any government shutdown. I think historical precedent is that the president, because they're in power, is the one who is most impacted by a government shutdown. I think the way in which people get their information now and the partisan divides in the country means that old playbook is sort of thrown out. But the threat of mass layoffs just raises the stakes of some permanent damage. Oftentimes with government shutdowns, once the government reopens, they're able to do back pay and sort of fill in the gaps that occurred over the course of however long the shutdown lasted. The threat of mass layoffs could pose more significant challenges there.